Okay, so we're kind of in the practical section. The nuts and bolts section is what I mentioned as we closed last time. And I want, again, just by way of reminder, have us take a quick peek back at, kind of in summary form, the things that we looked at in that third segment, that last thing that we just finished. First one, we said that was that marriage is God's comprehensive program for my transformation, of my own shalomic restoration. It's not the only one, but it's comprehensive in the sense that it covers every facet. There's really no place you can hide in marriage. You are, and we're going to talk about what that means here in a second, but there's no place you can hide in marriage. You can hide at work. You can be abusive at home and have trophies and letters of commendation at work. I knew of a young couple that were married, and the father of the couple, had gotten really, really sick, got pancreatic cancer, and their whole house was filled with letters from fellow employees at work. Just what an amazing person this guy was in particular, and just how much they appreciated him, how kind he was, how sensitive he was. And he was a very abusive father, both to his sons as well as his wife. And, it's easy to be one thing. For me, I'd have students that I taught would say, gosh, I wish you were my dad. I said, you need to talk to my kids. I said, it's easy to be a Christian in front of you. It's hard at home. We tend to let down at home. And to a certain extent, beloved, we should let down, but what we let down to needs to be as real as what we are outside. That's spiritual schizophrenia is a bad thing to fall into. So God's desire is this comprehensive thing. Everything we looked at, our mind, our will, our emotions, our conscience, everything. And it's shalomic restoration, bringing things back the way they're supposed to be. Second thing, and this is where we left off last time, is that my marriage needs to be in the center of God's plan that's older, much more older and grander than I can ever imagine. It gives purpose to marriage. It gives a sacredness to marriage. It doesn't put marriage in a separate place from ministry, from church, from my spiritual life. It's right there in the center, all right? And I use this little phrase that's kind of cutesy, but I think it's powerful, is that I need to be a story dweller, not a storyteller. I'm not telling people about what God's doing. I'm in it. This is where I live now. And this is something that I think is important, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes on this because it's not anywhere else in the notes and stuff that you guys have, is that God has a storyline. God has a narrative. God has a story, and his storyline needs to become the authority in my life. His storyline. What do I mean by that? Let me put this a different way. And this is gonna be a different concept for many of you, but I think it's a beautiful concept if you get your head around it. The basis of submission to God, the basis of obedience, the authority of God in our lives is the authority of narrative, not the authority of imperative. I'll explain what I mean by those words. That's easier to remember. It's the authority of narrative, not the authority of imperative. What's imperative? Imperative is a command. All right? In English grammar, in Greek grammar, imperative is a command. And the true basis of submission to authority with God is not that God commands me to do something, therefore I have to do it. That's the authority of command. Oftentimes, that's the only authority we have when we're raising children. It's the authority of command. Why should I do that? Because I said so. And I'm your father, and God's put me as authority over your life, and just whether you understand it or not, you're going to have to trust that I know what's best. However you pitch it to your children, but that's the authority of imperative. Does that make sense? Authority of command. But for you and I, the basis of authority is the authority of narrative. In other words, God's got this story, this plan for the fullness of time. And we're not going to talk about this, but it behooves you to become better acquainted with this story, to know it, to really understand it. When you read your Bible, you read it from that vantage point. You read it to try to understand this grand narrative, all right? The authority of narrative is this, is that a storyline has to go in a direction that's consistent with itself. So the protagonist, the antagonist, the plot reversals, all of the things that take place in a wonderful story have to all agree with the story. All right, let me give you just a crazy example. Let's say you're watching the Ring trilogy, Tolkien's Ring trilogy, and most of you have seen the films probably on that. All right, let's say you're in the thick of this battle for Helm's Deep, when there's all these orcs and goblins and all these crazy creatures with catapults and fire bombs and all this sort of stuff are attacking this castle. And you're watching this, and there's death everywhere, there's swords everywhere, there's chaos everywhere, and you're standing like this, you're watching this, you've watched it for the 10th time or whatever, and all of a sudden there's a 10-second clip of Despicable Me 3 that pops up on you're in the theater, you're watching this, and all of a sudden it pops up and you'd say, what was that? And then it goes back to Helm's Deep, all right? That's you and I interjecting our story into God's story. All right, and I don't mean the silliness of it. It's just that it doesn't fit the storyline. It doesn't fit. Despicable Me has its own storyline that fits. Putting Helm's Deep in Despicable Me wouldn't fit either. And this is a beautiful thing to me because it just simply means that as a believer, I need to be submitted to the story of God. Yeshua, our Lord Jesus, was submitted to the story of God. You can take, and I'm not playing with the language here, you can take the Garden of Gethsemane and you can put in the mouth of Jesus, you can put the words, not my story, but thy story be done. Because he said to the Father, he said, I really am not excited about this. I would really like for this cup to pass me by. And you say, well, he didn't really mean it. He's sweating blood, for crying out loud. It's called hematotidrosis. The capillaries in his forehead have ruptured and got into his sweat glands. It happened to World War II pilots under extreme stress. The Greek language says, he says, I am so sorrowful unto death. I could die from the pressure that's on me. And he says to the Father, I would really like for this to pass by. But not my will, but thine be done. That's submitting to the storyline. Or if you're a 13 to 15-year-old little Jewish virgin living in a town called Nazareth and an angel appears to you and says, how would you like to save the entire Jewish race and be the mother of the Messiah? Jewish women used to go down to the Jordan and pray that they could be the one to bear the Messiah. This is the highest honor. That's why Elizabeth said to her, blessed are you among women. Man, you got the prize. And this angel appears and says, blessed are you among women, you know? And he tells him that you're going to give birth to a son. How can this be? I'm a virgin. Holy Spirit's going to come upon you. All right? We don't know the whole conversation, but I know what's going through Mary's mind. I mean, this is a dinky village. This is not Atlanta. She's going to be scorned. She's going to be judged. She's got the guy that she loves, Joseph, an older man, who's a really cool guy that could have made a public humiliation of her, even had her stoned. He basically is going to put her aside quietly, and an angel appears to him and says, cool it, I'm in this. So you want to live with ridicule? You want to live with rejection? You want to be? And she says, be it done unto me according to your word. That's the power of the narrative. Submitting to the story as opposed to having to do this, having to do that. Don't do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. And that to me is such a beautiful thing. It changes obedience for a believer into being part of something bigger rather than just checking off a box. Okay? So that's where we were. Let's take a look at some practical stuff, some nuts and bolts stuff. And I want to go back into God's mind and say, what is God really interested in? That's practical. Well, first of all, we already talked about this, is that God's desire for us as individuals, for you as an individual, for me as an individual, for the two of you as individuals, if you're married, is intimacy with Him. We looked at that from Jeremiah 9. He wants us to be intimate with Him. But guess what? His desire for us as couples is also intimacy as couples. He wants us to be intimate with each other. Well, what in the world is that? What is intimacy? Well, it's in a passage of Scripture that's right before Genesis 3. I mean, Genesis 3 is the hinge of the Bible. It's a heavily weighted hinge with almost all of it on this side of the door and a little bit on this side of the door. All right? If you've ever been to a wedding, you probably have heard, man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. All right? They hardly ever read the next verse. And the man and the woman were both naked and unashamed. They don't read that in churches during weddings. All right? But that's the definition of intimacy. The definition of intimacy is the ability to be naked and unashamed in the presence of another. To be naked and unashamed in the presence of another. That's the definition of intimacy. Physical, yeah, physical, but more than that, emotional nakedness, spiritual nakedness. You know, one of the men that I respect the most as a Christian, I mean, love this person. He's a long-standing, old friend of mine. Went through a period of intense darkness, and just had it with God. And took his Bible on the kitchen table and took a butcher knife and just chopped his Bible into pieces, right in front of his wife. Lowest moment of his life. He still has all of those pieces in a paper bag in his closet just to remind him of grace. But you know, I mean, God brought him through it. She was an excellent helpmate in the midst of it. But that's intimacy. That's spiritual nakedness. That's being at your worst spiritually, not staying there. I'm not talking about, you know, being a reprobate in your home and believing that that's intimacy. But that's what intimacy is. It's the freedom, the ability to be naked and unashamed in the presence of another. To be safe, to feel genuinely safe. Your ideas are safe. Your money is safe. Your body is safe. Your soul is safe in the presence of another. Okay? And this is something that you may or may not know, but the natural ability to be intimate was the first thing lost in the garden that we have on record. And you say, wait a minute. I thought the first thing that happened in the garden was that man was separated from God. No, that's not in the record. First thing that happens in the garden after they eat is that they make clothes for themselves. Nakedness and shame are all of a sudden together. Whereas at the end of, there was no verse numbers and chapter numbers in our Bibles to the 15th century. So think of if you're just reading this or hearing it, you're going right on from 2 to 3 in Genesis. They're naked and unashamed, they're naked and ashamed. That's what you have. So if intimacy is the ability to be naked and unashamed in the presence of another, they lost that. They made clothes for each other. All right, and this didn't happen up at the summit. This happened in the garden between a husband and a wife. They're by themselves. Now, what does this mean? And I would say out of all the things I talked to you about in this entire time we've been together, this one is worth remembering. I think there's more than this one, but this one is really worth remembering, is that intimacy doesn't come naturally anymore. It doesn't just happen. Sex happens. We'll talk about that in a minute. Intimacy doesn't. Intimacy doesn't. And I think I think the absence of intimacy, and this is personal opinion, I could be as wrong as I could be right. I don't think I'm wrong, but I could be. The absence of intimacy, I think, is the leading cause of great divorce, of divorce among people that are 50 and older. And there's a reason there's an absence of intimacy. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. But I want you to get this. What does that mean? That means in order for you to be intimate with the person that you've married, is going to take work. It's going to take time. Probably going to take some cash. Just telling you. You know, when Jill and I lived in Colorado, I used to meet with this guy, and Jill and I went on a date every week. And this guy says, "You go on a date every week?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Isn't that expensive?" I said, "Well, Christian counseling is about $100 an hour." You know, I said, "Do the math. It's cheaper." And I don't think, there's not necessarily cause and effect, but he's divorced now. You know, you're going to have to work at it. And I'm going to just say this at the front end. We'll get to it in a minute. I put a lot of the onus for that on us guys. But intimacy does not automatically happen. And I think we have never been told that. So we get married thinking that it's just going to happen. It doesn't happen. If it's intentional, not instinctual. All right? So that was the first thing that Adam and Eve lost with each other, not just with God. Man lost intimacy with God. We know that. He eventually hides. He's scared of God. He didn't used to be afraid of God. All of a sudden he's afraid of God. We find that out later in the account. But earlier in the account, Adam and Eve have an issue with each other. So by design then, intimacy can only grow in an environment where it's safe to be naked and unashamed in the presence of someone else. If I'm a guy and I use my Edenic or Adamic self to intimidate or dominate, there's no way intimacy is going to develop in a home like that. So what I'd like to do then is talk about how do we build intimacy? How do we, what factors build it? All right? But I've saved the good news till last. Let's look at the bad news first. Let's look at some things that actually serve to destroy intimacy. Things that break it. Things that make it impossible. First one, sarcasm. Sarcasm is an absolute destroyer of intimacy. Words that wound. Words that you don't know for sure if they mean what they say, but you're pretty sure they mean exactly what they say. And Proverbs says this. I mean, the book of Proverbs is full of stuff like this. Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Like a crazy man shooting firebrands and arrows is he who deceives his neighbor and then says, "I was just joking." That's sarcasm. Sarcasm is when we play with painful words and try to make it seem like we really didn't mean the very words that we said. You cannot get close to a person that's like that. And this becomes a big deal simply because you cannot find a sitcom on television where sarcasm is not the relational style of every person there. It's all sarcastic, all of it. All right? And there's a difference between being playful and being sarcastic. All right? There's a lot of trash gets talked out in our family. It just is. A lot of humor. We got all of us can throw it back and forth. We can laugh about it. I don't think anyone's gotten hurt. But you know what? My wife is incapable of being sarcastic. I mean, she's capable of a whole lot of things, but I have never, in 44 years, I have never heard Jill say a sarcastic word about anyone or to anyone. You know? Now, she'll tell you she's got a whole bag of other things, but that is not one of them. But this, I'm telling you, if you are sarcastic, I've got 2 words that will really help you figure out what to do with it, all right? Stop it. Seriously. Just quit it. You know, you can't get close to someone that's prickly. You know, I've got a degree in biology, and I know that porcupines reproduce, but I have no idea how they pull that off, all right? I don't get it. I know so you can't get close to someone that's prickly. But this one, and I'll say this doubly important. It's bad enough to do this in private. It's worse to do it in front of your children. It's absolutely devastating to do it in public. To be sarcastic and diss your spouse in public. Please, 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 please don't if you do. Second one that destroys intimacy is time apart. And I'm not talking about dual careers and all that sort of stuff. There's so many good ways to be able to stay in touch if life demands that we be apart. I'm talking about choosing and preferring an alternate home. You know, if I'd rather be at the office than being with Jill, if I'd rather be teaching you than being with my wife. And she knows it. And there was a season in our life before the kids were very old where I was absolutely in love with the ministry. And I was a hot item in a lot of different ways. And it was real easy for me to live off of that stuff. I mean, I wrote books, I was on television, it was all working. And Jill just got in my face one day and just said, you love the ministry more than you love me. And at that point, I think I preferred it. It wasn't true. I've never loved anything more than her, but it was preferable because it was easier. And the rewards were fairly immediate. But time apart, if somehow life circumstances force you to not be around your spouse, then figure out ways to fix that. Phone call, we don't even use our phones for phones anymore, but we can, Billy Graham did that with Ruth, called her all the time. Francis Schaeffer, he's a dead Christian philosopher, died quite a long time ago. He wrote letters to his kids. His wife would gather them around, that she'd read letters to them that from their dad. Third one is anger. Anger is the enemy of sanctification. It's the enemy of the great reversal. Anger is the enemy of the great reversal. I think it's one of the only emotions in the Bible where it's clearly said that it's the enemy of the great reversal. All right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God's desire. Anger is an emotion. It's the easiest emotion to come up. We can all do it. If any of you have parents or you yourself ever taught or coached a theater, all right, anger is the easiest emotion for the worst actor or actresses to be able to do in a play. They can all pretend to be angry. They can't all pretend to be empathetic, caring, merciful, kind, funny. They can't do that, but they can pretend to be angry because it's just so close to the surface. All right, so close to the surface. Sex without love. It's a form of marital date rape. Strong statement here, but this is an interesting thing that I'm not sure we've ever thought about. You can have sex without love outside of marriage. Meaningful sex, pleasurable sex outside of marriage without love. You cannot have meaningful or pleasurable sex inside marriage without love. It doesn't work. Particularly for the wife. It just is a bad thing. And I think that's part of the reason that couples that live together prior to getting married don't necessarily have a very high success rate afterwards. There's an interesting proverb that has nothing to do with sex and has everything to do with sex. It's this. It says, stolen water is sweet. Stolen water is sweet. Well, water doesn't have any taste. So what makes it sweet? The thing that makes it sweet is that it's stolen. The fact that I stole this makes it sweet. I won't give you the whole history, but I was a professional thief in college and high school. I should have been in prison, and I'm not exaggerating. And I got to the place my senior year in high school and my freshman year in college when I could not enjoy anything if I bought it. I had to steal it in order to enjoy it. And it wasn't enjoying the thing, it was the thrill of stealing it that gave the meaning to me. And I think that's what makes illicit sex pleasurable, is that it's not supposed to be the way it is. And so when you get in an environment where it's legit and the thrill's not there, you equate the thrill with sex rather than equating the thrill with the theft. And so love within marriage, sex within marriage is really dependent upon love. Needs to be there. Needs to be there. There are some substitutions for intimacy. One of them is parenting. Parenting, probably one of the most noble tasks any of us are called to do if we get a chance to do it. And it's intense time together around a shared and valuable and even noble task. You spend all your time raising your kids, driving them, consoling them, teaching them, feeding them, clothing them. And you do it together. In one capacity or another, you're in this together for the most part. All right? And what can happen is that as a result of that, there's no time for each other. And so you don't put any money in your emotional 401, so that when you get to retirement, you've got all kinds of cash in your financial 401 and nothing in your emotional 401. And so you split up. I think that's part of the reason for gray divorce as well, is that couples spent so much time on the shared task of parenting that when it came time to be together alone, they had nothing to draw from. And so one of the best things that you can do for your children is to make sure that they know that you love your spouse more than you love them. And if you have problems with what I just said, then you need to get alone and get that figured out. It's one of the safest things you can do for your children, because they will then know that mom and dad are going to stay together. This is a big one, and there's a whole thing on grandparenting that I took out, but I think sometimes people my age throw themselves into grandparenting because they didn't develop intimacy when they were married, and so they just keep parenting, only it's other people's kids. Second one is technology, and this one's actually kind of worse. It's time spent with virtual people instead of the one real person in my life. It's easier to spend time virtually with others than it is to spend time with my spouse. And this is full opinion. I'm not telling you this is from God, but it is from me, so you can take it or leave it. That's up to you. But I think at this stage of the game, where we are as a culture, I think any kind of digital reconnection with someone from your past of the opposite gender is stupid. I was going to say something kinder, but it's just dumb. Don't do that. Don't go down that road. I mean, it is one story after another of people whose marriages end because someone got reconnected with someone from their past, happened to both be in the same town on a business meeting for something, caught a drink, had a meal, bam. You say, well, I'd never do that. I'll tell you something. True maturity demands a healthy mistrust of yourself. You and I are truly mature if we have a healthy mistrust of ourselves. You know, I'd say stuff to people I'm teaching. They said, don't you trust me? I said, I trust you less now that you told me that I should trust you. You know, come on.